Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Lawrence. I work with the Science Gateways Community Institute, which sponsors this webinar, as you probably know. I'm going to say a few quick words about how everything works and a little bit about SGCI, and then I will hand off to Paul, who will be presenting the fun part of this presentation. So we have set it up so that your video and audio is off. Please leave them off for now. There are controls at the bottom, so if at the end there's an opportunity to speak in person, you can control them there. But otherwise, we request that you put your questions in through chat during the presentation. I'll be saving all of those till the end, unless it's a clarifying question. So I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout Paul's talk. And passing those along to him. This is being recorded, so you can share it with others or revisit the content as well as the slides on our website. I will also tell you a little bit at the end of this presentation about our upcoming webinars, as well as some other opportunities you may want to know about. In particular, the Gateway Focus Week, which Paul is a part of, but I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So about the Science Gateways Community Institute, we are funded by the National Science Foundation to provide services in three main areas. We provide support for building and running gateways, and that includes hands-on development support as well as consultant advice. And Paul is part of that team of consultants and specifically providing usability support, which is a very popular one of our services. We also offer a catalog of gateways and software, so whether you're just getting started and you want to find a gateway that serves your disciplinary needs, or you're interested in looking for something that operates the way you would like to have a gateway work, you can go searching through the catalog for that. We also have software such as platforms and other gateway-related specialized software that is listed in that catalog to help with designing and building a gateway. Our second area of support is through education and training, such as this webinar. We also offer a week-long program called Gateway Focus Week, which is an intensive program that involves bringing yourself and one or two other team members to our location, which moves around throughout the year. We offer it twice a year, and during that week, you'll have an opportunity to dive in a deep way to think about your audience, your stakeholders, how you convey the value of what your gateway offers. You learn a little bit about usability, and all in all, people who have attended have found it to be not just valuable for their gateway, but for pretty much any other kind of project that they need to promote or convince other people to learn about. So there's an opportunity that in 2 weeks we will have a special webinar, which is talking more about what that Focus Week involves. We've also, if you look through our archive of webinars, you can find out more about aspects of Focus Week. There have been other specialized webinars talking about some of the concepts covered, as well as what the program is like in general. We have a variety of student-focused programs, both for educational purposes, such as Coding Institute, and also internship programs. Both of those are currently open to applicants, so if you have students who might be interested, we encourage you to visit our website. And if you have a project and you'd like to have a student intern, we are also taking applications for people who would like to have a student intern put on their project for free. We provide support to those students for the 8 weeks that they do that. Our annual conference is this year going to be October 19th to 21st in Bethesda, Maryland. And that's a great way to learn more about what other people are doing. And there are tutorials as well as presentations and other interesting opportunities to connect with others. And our website, of course, has a variety of things you might want to learn from. Finally, as we have community in our name, we are all about networking and building this community. We offer a partner program to help people connect with the partners who provide complementary services. We have an affiliates program, which is connected to our catalog, which is the software providers who are willing to support the software that they offer that is good for gateway construction or development. And of course, we have things like blogs and news and so forth. And if you want to share anything, just let us know. We also have a Google group, community forum, which is open to anyone. And it's a great way to post questions on a more informal basis and get feedback from other people. So all of those services are described on our website, sciencegateways.org. And we hope that you'll take advantage of those other ones as well as this webinar. Finally, a quick request, if you can, at the end of this webinar, please give us your feedback. We have 2 multiple choice questions as well as an optional open-ended question to let us know if there are other topics you'd like to hear more about. That is how we shape some of the content that we offer, including the usability, this subject. So I'll be posting this link on the chat area when we get closer to the middle of the program. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Paul take over. I'm really pleased to have Paul presenting again. He presented a few years ago, or pretty early in our history of webinars. But the value of his usability consulting, I think, has been tremendous, and the enthusiasm from the community for getting that kind of support has been really impressive. As someone who monitors the kinds of service requests that come through here, I see that just about every other one is asking for usability support. So we have kept Paul really busy over the last few years, and he's going to talk about what he learned from that. Oh, and I should mention that Paul is based at Purdue. So he is also a professor of things like usability there at Purdue, as well as serving as a supervisor of all the consultants and interns that support this program. So with that, Paul, you're welcome to share your screen and take it away.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Catherine. Really happy to be here. Looks like we have a great audience, and I'm excited to share with you, and hopefully you find this to be useful. I'm just going to share my screen here. And I'm assuming that you can see it.
Yep, I can see it now.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about some lessons learned from doing usability consulting with Science Gateways through SGCI over the past couple of years. Brief little bit about myself. So I'm the lead usability consultant for SGCI. I have a background in computer science. That's what my PhD is in. My area of specialization is human-computer interaction and data visualization. And I also have some background in cognitive science, psychology. I teach here in our UX design program. That's where all my teaching happens, both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about usability and related kinds of things. In fact, I was just telling Catherine, Wednesdays I teach for 5 hours, so I teach 5 hours today about various topics related to what we're talking about today. Just to give you a little bit of a context of the kinds of experiences that I'm drawing from to deliver this webinar. We've done somewhere in the range, I don't know the exact number, but maybe 25-ish consulting engagements over the past roughly 2.5 years through SGCI. And typically that's with me and usually 3 students that I sort of manage and oversee, and then they do a lot of the sort of hands-on work. And so that probably represents something like certainly hundreds, if not thousands of sort of person hours that we've spent doing this kind of work. And we've done consulting with gateways really across a wide range of disciplines and contexts, from chemistry education to hurricane modeling, animal tracking, libraries, and natural language processing, and many others. So quite a broad spectrum of contexts and disciplines that we've seen. And so the agenda for the webinar today, I'm going to cover three things. The first one is what we'll spend most of the time on. And so this is, I'm going to discuss really actually a small set of common usability issues that we've encountered doing this kind of consulting work with science gateways, and offer some strategies and some guidelines for improving them, for dealing with the kinds of issues that we see. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about a few challenges that I think might be somewhat particular to gateways rather than just more generic sort of usability kinds of things, and a few suggestions for how to deal with those. And it sounds like Catherine might also talk about this third one, but I was just going to talk briefly about some of the consulting stuff that we do and mention something about our upcoming focus week. And as part of that, I'll show an example of a report that we did from one of our consulting engagements, just to give you a sense of what kinds of things come out of those. Okay, so before we do that, I want to offer somewhat of a definition of usability, really actually breaking down this construct into 5 particular dimensions, to give you some language to sort of think and talk about usability more precisely than you may be doing currently. So I'm going to define 5 dimensions of usability here that are not by any means the only ones, but are certainly probably the most sort of common and well-established ones that have been around for many decades now. So the first one is learnability, and this really refers to how easy it is for novice users to do what they need to do when they encounter a system. Efficiency, so if people know how to use it, how efficient are they? How quickly can they do their tasks? Memorability is the third one, and this refers to if somebody knows how to use a system and they go away for a while and come back, can they reestablish proficiency reasonably well? The fourth one is errors. So do people make errors? How often and how severe are they, and can people recover from them? And the fifth one is satisfaction. So are people satisfied? Are they pleased? Do they like to use the product? And so these are 5 specific dimensions that help us think through usability, and especially if you're interested in, say, doing a usability evaluation, this might help you think about, well, really what we want to focus on is learnability, for example, focusing on novice users, or maybe that's not what you want to focus on, but it's some language to help you think through usability in a bit more detail. Okay, so on to the issues. So I sort of reflected on these engagements that we've done over the past 2.5 years. And as a result of looking through our reports and sort of reflecting on those engagements, I've identified 3 issues. So it might not sound like a lot. There are certainly more than 3, but these are 3 that I think are almost universal. They appear across contexts, across, sort of differing levels of complexity in gateways. And they're also 3 that I think don't require a lot of expertise to fix. So these are things that you can identify, you can probably fix on your own. And if all gateways dealt with these 3 things, there would be a lot fewer usability problems in the world, I think. So I'm going to go through each of these in a bit of detail. So the first one, users are confused about what to look at. So when users encounter a gateway, they don't really know what they're seeing. They don't know what they're supposed to be looking at, and they're not sure how to make sense of this new site that they're encountering. The second one is that users are overwhelmed by content. Often this is textual, not always, but I'm going to especially focus on textual content. And then the third one is that users are lost in the website. So this is more about navigation, navigability, knowing how to move around the site. And so I think these three issues really capture a large portion of the significant problems that we've seen. So let me talk about each of them a little bit. So the first one, I've grabbed an example here of a site. I didn't want to pick a particular gateway to make anybody feel bad. So I've picked some examples where they're not a science gateway, but they're sites that anyone can find. And in fact, I think they're relatively representative of what gateways can look like. So the content can kind of just be swapped out. And I think what I'm going to say here is almost entirely, if not entirely, transferable to any pick your favorite gateway and put it in there. So this is a website for Fidelity. Many of you may be familiar with this. I just grabbed this screenshot yesterday, so it's a current one. And it's sort of a typical site. It's not terrible. It's sort of a typical kind of website that you might expect with a certain level of complexity. And what I want to talk about here is often what we expect users to do when they see a site like this, and then I want to tell you what they really do. So what we expect them to do typically is start at the top, and they work their way across with their eyes, and then they move down and they just keep doing that kind of pattern, and they're scanning all the available information to figure out what to do next. So we expect that users are doing something like this. So they're starting at the top left, they're moving across, they see, okay, I have these menu items. Then they're going to do it again for the sub menu items. Then they're going to go down. Then they're going to look across those items there. And then they're going to make sort of a rational choice about what paths to pursue. So this is not what people do. What users actually do is they encounter a site and they feel a sense of panic, in a sense. Whether it's conscious or not is sort of it's a perceptual thing where they're looking for something to anchor onto. So people encounter a site and they say, what should I do here? What stands out? What am I supposed to focus on first to help me pursue my sort of sense-making path? And so probably what they're doing is they're looking at things that that stand out. And they're probably looking at something like this, and something like this. And then probably they're gonna click and they're gonna proceed from there. So it's not, most of the time users are not pursuing this really sort of linear, systematic, rational process of making a decision about which information to pursue. And so that's the first really common problem that we see. And that leads me to the first sort of principle of usability here, which is referred to as visual hierarchy. And this means that the arrangement and the styling of the things that are on the page implies importance, and it tells people where to look. And it's a very unconscious process largely. And so the visual hierarchy influences where people are going to look and in what order they're going to look at things. And so I'm going to do a little test here. I'm going to show you something in a second on the screen. And I just want you to don't overthink it. Just let your eyes go where they want to go. And we'll just see how that process goes. So this, some of you may have seen something like this before. I've done this a number of times. Not everybody reads this in the order that it suggests, but most people do. And so what you see is that people, there is a visual hierarchy here. So using things like color and size and sort of bolding of text tells people's eyes where to go. And often what happens is they're not going to read from top to bottom, and they're not going to read from left to right. They're going to read based on a visual hierarchy that's established on the page. And I'll show you a couple examples of sort of website designs and redesigns. So what we're looking at here is an somewhat old version of the Node.js website. So this is a JavaScript framework. Many of you might be familiar with it. Really here, there's no good visual hierarchy. And so what I imagine is that when people encounter this site, they don't really know what to do. So first, I think most people's eyes are going to go to the logo. It sort of stands out. And then people are going to just sort of scan around looking for something to anchor their attention on. And probably do that for a while until something just registers and they decide where to go next. The next slide is this is a redesign of the site. It's a little bit old now, but I think actually exemplifies this issue of visual hierarchy quite well. And so what we see now is there are some things that really stand out. And so probably people's eyes are drawn first to these large buttons here. And maybe perhaps first or second to this other notification here about a security update. And why is that important? Well, those are the things that people, first of all, are primarily going to the site for, especially as first-time users, and the information that's most important for a security update. And people later are going to look at the navigation menu across the top. And in fact, that's not what you want people to look at first. So you want them to see the download buttons, because that's largely what they're coming there for. And so that's a nice example of a redesign there. There are a number of things that can be used to create this kind of visual hierarchy. This is one, just example of something that I found that suggests 5 ways of doing that. So scale, color, contrast, type. So, this is your font and your bolding and your sizes and so on. Spacing, composition, so layout. But really, even if it's just using different sizes and sort of boldings of your fonts and placing them strategically in the page, that's going to make a big difference. And what you don't want people to do is come to your site and just do this sort of visual scanning, and they feel a sense of panic because they say, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at. So give them that anchor. So that brings me to the first guideline here, which is related to the first issue. So people are confused about what to look at. So use visual hierarchy to tell them where to look, and use a few of those mechanisms that I showed on the previous slides. So the second issue, users are overwhelmed by content. A lot of times this ends up being textual content. And there are so many studies now that show us that people do not read text on the web unless they're expecting it. So if they're expecting a research paper, as an example, or a newspaper article, then they'll read it. If they're not going to read it. People read less than 30%, less than 20% sometimes of the text that's presented to them. And this is well established over many studies. And so there's a big difference between writing, a scientific article or a white paper and writing for the web. And I think a lot of times gateways creators, don't have that web design experience to be able to differentiate those. I'm going to show you a study that was done where some different versions of text that were on a website were used, and then the usability was assessed just simply by modifying the text. So this is an excerpt of text that was used. It's a blurb about the state of Nebraska and some features about it to try to attract people, I think, for tourist purposes. So this is the chunk of text that was used as sort of the control in the study, and I'm going to show you a number of the other treatments that were developed. So next, what they did was simply cut the word count by half. So took out 50% of the words, kept the gist still there, and that was the second treatment, so 50% word count. The next one was taking the exact same text as the 50% word count, but making it more scannable. So using bullets, which means that people don't have to read linearly to make sense of what's there. They can scan and they can jump around. The next one is that they took that same 50% text, or they took the same as the original text, and they made the language more objective. So took out some of the more marketing kinds of language and simply used more objective language. And then the last one was a combination of all three. So 50% reduction in word count, more scannable text, and more objective language. And then so they tested this, and they captured the sort of subjective responses to the perceived usability of the site given the text that was on it in each version. And what they found, the numbers themselves are not terribly important on their own. But one, first of all of the treatments besides the control showed significant improvement on usability. And I think really the important thing here is that the combined version showed much higher improvement. And so really the lesson here is that removing text is not bad, it's actually good. People are going to get more out of it. And making text more scannable by using bullets and using other sort of means of allowing for scanning actually makes people read more. It's sort of counterintuitive, but they don't feel as overwhelmed, and they don't just check out and say, this isn't what I signed up for. I wasn't expecting a lot of text here. There's a case study, you can search for this online. This guy wrote a blog post, somewhat fairly detailed blog post about this startup company called Scalar. I think it was a startup at the time, and they do, I think, weblog sort of management and performance assessments or something like that. And he wrote about how he did a usability testing sort of program with them. And there's a lot of detail on the post, but really I want to focus on one particular thing, which is that they were finding they had a features page. So this page was describing all the features of their system, not unlike what we see on many gateways and pages in general. And as a result of doing this usability testing and then revamping their site, they ended up removing a large portion of the text that was on their features page. So there was a big description of the text. They thought, we're going to tell people all about all the great features. But of course, nobody read it because that's not what they were expecting to see. And so they removed a lot of the text. And then they did some measurements on what the improvement, what the differences were between the two versions of the site. And one in particular that stands out is that there was a 30% increase in the amount of time spent on the features page. And so again, it's this sort of counterintuitive thing where a large portion of text was taken away and people spend more time with less text because they're actually going to read it if it's scannable and they can do it quickly. And so that's really, this finding is not unique to this site. It's really generalizable and it's quite universal. So the takeaway is write text for the web. Don't write text for, in ways that you would write in a scientific paper or in a book or something like that. And the way the site looks right now is something like this. I think it could even be a little bit more improved. I think that the text could be slightly more scannable, but it's not bad. You can see they're using visual hierarchy here to draw you to certain places. And there's not a ton of text. And so I think, this is a nice example of a redesign based on this really particular issue of being overwhelmed by the content and making text more scannable. So this brings me to my second guideline, having to do with users being overwhelmed. Avoid large blocks of text, even when you think, oh, we just have so much to tell people. It doesn't work that way. If they want to read a paper about what you have, they will, and then make that available, but don't give them the paper version on the web, because that's not what people want. It's not what they expect, and they will spend less time than they will if you give them short scannable text. So use short scannable text combined with a visual hierarchy to make people not feel overwhelmed and make your site more readable. Okay, the last one is, so users are lost in the website. And I'm going to propose 3 questions that users should always be able to ask from anywhere in your site, or they should always be able to answer from anywhere in your site. The first one is, where am I? So where am I in the site, in the bigger picture of your site? Where have I been? And so for simple sites, this one doesn't matter as much because maybe it's a single page, but for ones that are more complex, this becomes quite important. And similarly, for really simple sites, maybe there isn't anywhere you can go, but for most of them, there are places you can go within the site. So I'll talk briefly through a few of these. So this, many of you may have seen, the Exceed website. I think there's a nice example, and there are many ways of doing this, but this is one example of helping people know where they are. So if you notice at the top of the page, there's this navigation bar. You can go and click into a number of sort of sub pages within there, within any one of those. And so what I did here is I just went and clicked on one of the pages, developer resources, within the ecosystem menu. And you see, really simple. All they did was change the background color of the ecosystem menu, but it's a very small indication to tell users where they are. So they say, oh, there's this complex site, there are all these pages, I'm within the ecosystem branch of it. And it's a really simple way to tell people where they are, and it makes people feel like they're not lost when you can do that. Another one, again, for more sort of complex sites, where have I been? So as you start moving around the site, it's very hard to remember how you got to a certain place. And a very common technique, and we end up recommending this to, I don't know what number, but a fair number of the gateways that we've consulted with, is to do what are called breadcrumbs. So many people are probably familiar with these. You can see, The Guardian and complex sites use these all the time. So it's really just it's a hierarchy to say, well, home is the top level and world is the second level and Americas is the third level, and here's where you are. And so it's like leaving breadcrumbs to tell you how to get back. So again, there are other techniques, but this is a really common, well-established, well-tested technique for showing people where they are in your site. This one is an interesting one. So this is, some of you might be familiar with Bootstrap, which is a CSS library. They use this really interesting technique to do a combination of these to tell people sort of where they can go and where they are, not so much where they've been, because this is a single page. So sometimes you do have to have a single page with a lot of content. probably want to avoid that if you can, but this is an example where there's really, really long scrollable page. And what they have here on the right side is this menu that is fixed. And as you scroll through the content, you're scrolling up and down, that menu doesn't go anywhere. So it provides this nice sort of mental anchoring to tell you, here's the structure of where of the site. And as you scroll, the spot where you are in the page is going to become highlighted. So it's a dynamic sort of structure, sort of representation of the structure. And so even with a really long page that's very easy to get lost in, it tells you, here's everything that you can go to, and here's where you are, in a really nice dynamic sort of way. So I like to show people this example as a somewhat non-typical. You don't see this often, but it is a nice way to deal with a particular problem that we sometimes see with gateways, especially if you're dealing with, say, a documentation page where you do have sometimes unavoidably long content. This is a really nice technique to sort of deal with that. So that brings me to my third guideline, dealing with the third challenge, which is that users get lost. And so the guideline is provide clear visual cues to help users answer those three questions. So where they are, where they've been, and where they can go. And I think, these three, it might seem small, but I think these capture really a large portion of the issues that we see and the suggestions that we make in our consulting. And they're things that I think you all can do on your own with some basic knowledge and can really improve the usability of your gateways. Next, I just want to talk through a few. I've thought of three challenges that I think are not really generic, and they're somewhat specific to gateways. So we've seen these in a number of our consulting engagements, and I'm going to talk through each one just briefly. So the first one is that people say, well, we're a small team, maybe we're NSF funded or wherever the funding might come from. We don't have a usability person and we don't have the money, to hire someone. This one is definitely a surmountable challenge. There are many ways that you can do usability improvements on your own without any in-depth training. In fact, this is in our focus week, this is what I teach people to do, is how to run your own usability test. And it's not hard, and there are many resources for doing so. If you look online, there are all kinds of resources for doing web usability testing, without any knowledge, and I can suggest some specific resources later. So this one, it comes up, but I think it's not as big of a challenge as people think it is. And what we see time and time again when I show people how to do usability testing in the focus week, people are always surprised. They say, wow, I didn't know I could do this. We're going to do this. This is great. We thought we needed all kinds of expertise and so on. And so I think this is definitely a surmountable challenge. The second one is that oftentimes we see people using third-party software that either can't be changed or can't be changed easily. So people might be using Jupyter notebooks or something that is sort of integrated somehow into their gateway, and they say, well, there's not so much we can do, we're just plugging it in, and the users are being taken there. And really our response to that has been, that's true, right? You can't necessarily do something, or you can sometimes if you have enough sort of technical expertise to maybe modify the styling of the page, apply some styling and so on. But typically what we recommend is just make sure that the entry point into that third-party software is usable. And often that is not the case. So make sure people know why they're going into a third-party software, how they're getting there, in terms of their task flow and their navigation. Depending on the implementation, maybe also how to get back, or how that fits within the overall context of the site. And so I think still those those three issues that I presented earlier are often still applicable here, not with the particular third-party software, but with the overall instantiation of that within the gateway. So again, I think certainly to an extent that one is also surmountable. And then the last one is something that I was sort of thinking about the other day and thought this is actually quite relevant for gateways, and I've talked about it on a few occasions in the past. And this is something called the survivorship bias. And what this means is that if you do want to talk to your users, get a sense of who they are, or maybe do usability testing with them, or just gather some information from them, don't fall prey to this bias. And what this bias is that people who use your system currently, so they're current users, they can be thought of as survivors. They're the people who made it through, right? They're the people who use it, and it may be out of necessity, maybe they have to, maybe there's no other alternative. Gateways are not like apps on the App Store, where if you don't like one, you can often pick another one that's better. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to use it for your workflow. And the people who do have a choice, they're not going to persist. So they're not survivors. They check out your site maybe, and it's too difficult, it's confusing or whatever, and so they drop off. And so what ends up happening is if you just sample your current users and you say, oh, well, they all seem happy, that's a big danger, because you're missing out all the people who may have tried it and they didn't persist, and you may be sampling people who don't have a choice but to use your system. And so really the way around that is to do usability testing with people that you're recruiting from outside. Even if it's grabbing someone in the hall and saying, hey, come in here for a minute, I want you to sit down, use my gateway, and try to grab some insights from that. That's oftentimes more valuable than just asking your current users to tell you what they think. And there are other issues there, because they're familiar and people like familiar things, and so they're going to tell you they like it. It doesn't mean it's good. But I think, to try to distill that into one challenge, I think just thinking about it as a survivorship bias is probably valuable. So those are the I think three challenges. Not that there aren't others, but those capture a fairly wide spectrum of the consulting engagements that we've done. What I wanted to do now, just for about a minute or two, is pull up I just want to pull up an example of some documentation that we tend to do in our consulting work. This is something that we did with one particular engagement, and I know that I think Wida is on the call here, and I know she sent it out quite broadly earlier, and so I think she's probably okay with me showing it. And I just wanted to walk through really quickly, just to give you a sense. I'm not going in a lot of detail. As you can see, there are 136 pages here, but just to give you a sense of the kinds of assessments that we do. And so we'll take a site, we'll sort of do a really deep dive analytically into the site as a sort of expert review technique. We'll find problems, we'll give assessments, we'll highlight specific portions of a page and say this particular thing is not good for this particular reason. And then, we'll sort of provide, and we might do this by feature, or it depends on the particular gateway. We'll provide some sort of next steps, what's actionable, what can be done, and often sort of a severity ranking of the problems that we encounter. And so this is just, an example of from one engagement that we did. And we'll share some sort of principles and provide rationale for why we think something is good or bad, or what can be done about it. And so really, I just wanted to pull this up to give you a sense. And if you're interested in seeing more of these, I can probably share them, as long as the gateway owners are fine with that, and At least with this one, I know that that's the case. So I think Catherine was maybe going to talk a little bit more about this. I just wanted to briefly mention our upcoming focus week, which is going to be at Columbia University in New York, June 1st to 5th. And the application deadline is coming up towards the end of March. There is a session, and you can see the overview of the agenda here. There is a session that I run on usability, and what I do there is I teach people how to do their own usability tests, and you can take that knowledge away, hopefully, and use it as you develop your gateway further, and actually not need to rely on experts, and do your own testing. With that, I think that's about all I wanted to say. I wanted to make sure that there's time for questions, so I will stop talking and answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thanks, Paul. That was terrific. I learned something from it for sure. So we haven't had any questions yet. We had a few lively comments. Maybe you can comment on this one remark that came through from Dave. He said, I think that the breadcrumbs example shows where I am, not where I have been. The back button shows me where I have been. And Mona responded, I think both can be used, but it kind of depends on the goal. Breadcrumbs are much faster if you want to go up more than one page or level instead of a bunch of back buttons. I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. So it depends on the instantiation. There are many ways of doing it. And certainly the breadcrumbs do show you where you are. But particularly with respect to the back button versus breadcrumb kind of thing, there are ways to do breadcrumbs that do show you where you have been. So it's more like a history feature kind of breadcrumbs, which is what the back button tends to do. The problem with the back button is that it's not visible. And so often there's this concept of visibility that we tend to talk about in interface design. And you want to make visible things as much as possible that don't need to be hidden. Some users won't know that they can go to the back button and figure out where they've been. Others, when it's sort of out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. So I personally, I almost would never rely on the back button as a mechanism for showing people where they've been. More advanced users can maybe figure that out. But as a general recommendation, I wouldn't rely on it. I would rely on a sort of standard breadcrumb or a modified one if we really want to show people their path of where they've been.
So Paul, I think the example you showed actually showed me where we were, not how we got there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's one instance of the way that a breadcrumb can look. And so oftentimes that's the case, that it's to show you where you are within a hierarchy. But there are ways to do it so that it shows you this sort of history of your path, which is sort of where the breadcrumb metaphor comes from. Mm-hmm. So in that particular case, that's probably true, but I don't think it's the only way to do it.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave, for that question, or that comment too. There's a couple more questions that have come in. One is, when you engage for a usability study, is it only one gateway, or if you have more than one, can 2 or 3 be done at once?
Oh, so if someone has more than one gateway, is that? I guess
yeah, because I know that Shannon asked this, and I know that I think she oversees multiple gateways at her institution.
Okay. That's interesting. I don't know that we've dealt with that. So typically what we do, we work on, let's say about 5 consulting engagements in parallel. And typically those are all 5 different gateways owners. Theoretically, I suppose we could work, on multiple gateways from a single person. Logistically, depending on what's going on, we may end up just staggering them. but we do work on multiple consulting engagements in parallel. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that part of the answer to the question has to do with the fact that if they're all distinct gateways, they're gonna be facing some pretty different look and feel issues and navigability and what their purpose is. So it's kind of like tailoring a suit. You can get approximate if you just go to the size of the person, but to get the really best benefit out of it, you have to actually fit it to the person's body, so to speak. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we do give very tailored assessments. I mean, it's only so valuable to provide general sort of principles, but you know, we do quite deep dives into our assessments of particular gateways.
Yeah, and that actually leads to the next question, which came from Mona, which is how long is each usability study or engagement?
That's a good question. I'm going to say 6 weeks, roughly. I mean, they vary. So maybe I'd say 4 to 8 weeks, but most of what we're doing nowadays tends to be somewhere in that range of 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks.
Okay. And then, and it sounds like sometimes maybe that's spread out as if you're working on more than one in parallel. Is that right? Or would that?
That would capture sort of beginning to end, although it's sometimes things get delayed. Sometimes our schedules are fairly dynamic. We end up moving things around quite a bit. But we do that with the intention of working on multiple ones at a time.
Okay. So if there's a lull in one, yeah, if there's a lull in one, you can be working on another one, I guess, or something like that. Yeah. So there's another couple questions that have come in. One is, do you have thoughts about leveraging existing design systems versus creating your own and their role in usability? And that comes from Edwin.
Okay, good question. Without knowing more about where the question's coming from, I'd say leverage existing things whenever you can. Because, I mean, really with this kind of work, you're not, I mean, it's not like you're working for Google and you're trying to develop a new design system, a new design language. That's not the point of the work. So the point of the work is just to get it out there, to get people access to it and to make it usable. So I would always suggest leveraging existing, templates, design languages, design patterns. There are lots out there, assuming that it fits the needs of the project. If it doesn't, then we would talk more about how something could be built from the ground up, or customizing something that exists. But as a general recommendation, I would say, use ones that exist, that have been around, and often those have been, vetted for usability, probably on multiple occasions.
Yeah, okay. And then another question came in. This session focused on websites, but would this translate to web applications and tools?
Yes, I would say mostly. The issues that I presented are not specific to website implementation. The only hesitation I have there is if we're talking about different screen sizes, things can change. So if you're talking about only say a mobile app that's used on a phone, and not a tablet or not a desktop screen, that changes things a little bit. The issues are still the same, but the ways that we address them are a bit different.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. So I have a question, and also I'm going to put up the final slide here just so I can also tell people a little bit about the upcoming Focus Week webinar and so forth. But the question I was wondering is, you're talking about how easy it is to do your own really quick and dirty usability testing, or you can apply some of these kinds of heuristics and so forth that you suggested. What do you recommend to people who are going to ultimately be strongly biased, as far as like they're, because I mean, I can look at my house and when I walk in the door and, I don't notice the things that have been sitting there forever that really need to be put away.
Mhm.
But someone else
Yeah.
coming in is going to go, oh, this is a little messy or whatever. So I guess that, the tendency of someone who's gone to the trouble of creating something is to think that it really is functional. And
Right.
how do you step outside that bias? And I mean, if you don't have handy, unbiased people available for you, like usability people.
Right. And that's a great question. Very important to be aware of. And that's specific. So I want to draw a specific distinction here between doing an expert evaluation and doing what I'm calling here a usability test. So an expert evaluation is something that our team does. We sit down, we look at the site, we give recommendations. I don't suggest that people do that. What I suggest is that people do a usability test where you're bringing in somebody else who doesn't have the bias that you have as the creator, and you're observing them using your site. And that's where that bias gets avoided. You're not the one doing that assessment yourself. And I think that's really, really extremely critical, actually, to not be doing that yourself, but to be observing other people and letting them show you where all the problems are. And so that's something that we teach you how to do in the focus week.
Yes, right. I think that's a great point. Yeah, because I certainly I can say from personal experience how hard it is to let go of some of those things sometimes.
Yeah, that is
So
the
yeah.
number one danger of of usability and user-centered design is thinking that it's good because you made it, or thinking that people use it the way you use it.
Or not wanting to let go of it because it took so much work to get there
Well,
too,
yeah,
right?
that's a
Yeah.
bit of that's an issue.
Yeah. So there a question came in from Mona just asking, can you do evaluation of a mobile app?
Sure, yeah. I mean, most of what we do is websites, but we're often talking to people about doing sort of responsive design work, and often people will come and say, we have a site, but we would like people to be able to use it on their phones, but it just, the usability is terrible right now, and so we will give them recommendations for how to do that. So absolutely, that's something that we do.
I want to mention, just as a follow-on, as you said, you're featured during the focus week in the middle there in a section about usability, but there's lots of other things that are that happened during that week. And we are going to be offering in 2 weeks a special webinar on February 26th, same bat time, same bat channel, where you can learn about what Focus Week offers from the two main instructors of the program, Juliana Casavan and Nancy Marone. So that'll be coming up. We'll be promoting that, mentioning that in our newsletter and an email coming out. We also want to let you know that we have, this is a monthly webinar series. If you're new to this, by all means, continue to check this out. Right now, this year we're running a series on gateway platforms. So the first one was on Tapas in January. We have this brief interlude on usability, and then part 2 will be next month on March 11th on Hub Zero, and we have several other couple others lined up, and we're looking for we're going to be adding some other platforms as well as part of this series. So I encourage you to come and check that out in March. And finally, I should have mentioned also, part of the reason, as Paul mentioned, part of the reason we're having this special webinar in 2 weeks is because the application is currently open. It's the March 27th deadline, as he mentioned, for the first focus week, which will be in New York, but the second one will be in San Diego in November, December time, and that deadline will be obviously later. So, but we also currently have, as I mentioned during the introduction, opportunities for students, which include internships and the Coding Institute that runs during the summer. And we're also looking for hosts of interns, which means if you have a project and you'd like an intern to do some work on it, whether that's coding or some other kind of task, let us know. We have a form on our website looking for projects for these students who are excited to work on these things. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Paul, for this super thing. If you were on chat, you would see that there's a whole bunch of enthusiastic thanks also in chat. So
I see it, yes.
yeah. So thank you again. I'm so glad you could all be here and learn all this with us together. We look forward to seeing you next month.
Great, thanks everyone.